Mhm. The election of 1896. William Jennings Bryan versus William McKinley. William versus William. Will goodwill prevail? Okay, so part one is context. This is what was happening before the election and what was in the mind of voters leading into it.
Starting off, we have the Panic of 1893, which was an American economic depression running until around 1897. It included overbuilding and speculation, more disruptive labor disorders, tight money policies, and other things like worsening agricultural depression.
All right, so let's say in about the 1880s, a severe deflationary period began in the American economy. This obviously caused heavy losses and possibly bankruptcy for the farmers. This is because obviously, due to the deflationary period, the real value of money was increasing, and farmers now had to pay back more in terms of real value to the loaners. And typically, these farmers paid back in terms of crops, so now they had to create more crops that's sustainable in order to pay off debts, which created great problems for the farming population.
In fact, in 1870, the currency in circulation for each person was about $19.42. But then in 1890, it increased to $22.67. Although it did increase, in this time period, the size of businesses and the national population increased tenfold, increased way faster. And this still worsened the economic issue for everyone that was trying to sustain their living.
And this collapse fell the hardest upon the sharecropping South, and this is where the cotton prices greatly lowered, and as a result, 1/4 of all American farms were operated by tenants by the year 1880.
All right, so now moving on to tariff policies. The tariff bill of 1890 increased average duties across all imports from about 30 and 39% to 49.5%. So now the Congress, the billion-dollar Congress at this time, made this act, and this boosted rates from to their highest ever levels at peacetime.
So while there was a boosted rates for peacetime level, there was also a detrimental factor towards the lives of farmers. Because of the imposing of a cost of all products that were leaving the nation, the natural high protective nature of the tariff gave more and more money to people like manufacturers, while farmers had it a little more difficult. They had to sell their low price products to a competitive and unprotected world market, while having to buy their manufactured goods from quite the opposite in a protected home market.
And the public opinion on these high protective tariffs were split between industrialists and farmers, Northerners and Southerners, and Republicans and Democrats. So next is the gold silver issue, and the California gold rush of 1848 led to many Americans traveling west for this valuable resource, and it spread as a commodity as people mined it for a lot of money.
However, in the 1860s, silver was discovered in Colorado. This finding was initially overshadowed by gold, and the end of its first boom was caused by the repeal of the Sherman Silver Purchase Act in 1893, which at first had required the U.S. Treasury to purchase a certain amount of silver every month.
However, the People's Party, which was better known as a populist, was led by farmers, and they believed the free coinage of silver would basically solve all American economic issues. And this belief was spread by the pamphlet called Coin's Financial School, written by William Hope Harvey in 1894. Now we're on to part two, which is the actual election, which includes the candidates, the issues, and the campaigns.
So William McKinley was voted and elected into the governor position in Ohio in 1891 and 1893, which was, of course, right before the election of 1896. He highly depended on his fellow Ohioan Marcus Alonzo Hanna, who had become very rich and prosperous through the iron business.
Hanna's funding lubricated the convection steamroller, which allowed McKinley to be nominated on his first ballot in June of 1896. And as a Hamiltonian, Hanna believed that the government should basically focus on the big businesses, and then the prosperity would trickle down to the laborers, which many people disagreed with.
McKinley's opponent was William Jennings Bryan, a former congressman who was known as the Boy Order of the Plaid. In his Cross of Gold speech, William he stated, and I quote, We will answer the demands for a gold standard by saying to them, you shall not press down upon the brow of labor this crown of thorns. You shall not crucify mankind upon a cross of gold.
And this speech was soon became a sensation, which led to him becoming the presidential nominee for the Democratic Party.
During this election, Bryan tended to campaign throughout the Midwestern swing states, while McKinley actually led a what was called a front porch campaign, staying within his hometown area and giving speeches to those who came to visit. So talking about the tariff policy a little more, Hanna and McKinley, they wanted higher protective tariffs because they tried to make the tariff a policy and focus it throughout the election. McKinley actually sponsored the Tariff Bill of 1890, which of course was increasing average duties across all imports from about 38% to 49.5%. He began to be called the Napoleon of protection because he was always adjusting the rates to protect the interest of the American manufacturing.
And meanwhile, as a Democrat, William Jennings Bryan believed tariffs should be lowered. He believed the system of protective tariffs was held together by the cohesive power of plunder, favoring businesses over the majority of the public who were working people.
All right, so now moving on to gold-silver issue. McKinley and the Republican Party leaned towards more hard money policies and declared for the gold standard, even though McKinley's previous voting record in Congress surprisingly leaned towards the silver standard.
In his famous Cross of Gold speech, William Jennings Bryan actually said, and I quote, "We will answer their demands for gold standard by saying to them, you shall not press down upon the brow of labor this crown of thorns. You shall not crucify mankind upon a cross of gold."
And as his speech was so sensational and famous, it was the reason why he was the nominee for the Democratic Party. In the election of 1892, the populace, which was in the previous election, the populace had demanded inflation through the unlimited coinage of silver at the ratio of 16 ounces of silver to that 1 ounce of gold. And that was despite the current ratio in the market being about 32 ounces of silver to 1 ounce of gold. Basically, they're trying to make silver a lot more valuable in terms of gold. And Bryan and the Democrats continued this movement into the next election, 1896. And now we're on to part 3, which applies this election to skitilop and gives our suggestion, our choice as to whom this company should vote for.
All right, so we said that skitilop should vote for the Republican candidate, William McKinley, in the election of 1896 because of the company's values and the history of its founder, President P.
So let's start off by going through the history of skitilop. And first, Opie's grandfather, or Opie's just like far ancestors, his President P was part of the gold rush, and he was a homesteader as a result of the Homestead Act of 1862, which was made by Abraham Lincoln, who was a Republican president, by the way.
President P, he made his patent on matches, and of course, historically, all his friends came together and they started the match company. He was a master of advertising, and his business obviously quickly grew and spread into the areas and categories of batteries, cosmetics, and other products.
As a result of this extensive history, skitilop centers around industry. So this is why they should vote for the Republican candidate, William McKinley, because he supports high tariffs that protect industries in the world market.
In addition, most Republicans, including McKinley, believe the gold standard was superior and more stable to that of silver because of less fluctuation. And even in the case of skitilop, as you said before, President P started his road to wealth because of the gold rush, which means that this gold standard is much more valuable to the company than silver ever would be.
And on the other hand, William Jennings Bryan called for lower tariffs and the United States to transition from the silver standard, both of which would harm his business like skitilop.
And that's our summary, analysis, and application for the election of 1896. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.